placement plan. And then a couple of key points where we're jumping out of the corridor to make good connections to major activity centers and stations and the like, such as downtown St. Pete or Carillon or downtown Tampa. Mr. Chair, I see a hand raised. Would you prefer I take questions while we go through the presentation or hold them to the end?
If you're willing to take a question, let's
Sure.
entertain it as we go.
Sure.
Whose hand's up?
I see Mr. Johnson's hand.
Mine.
Oh yeah, Bill Johnson, go ahead.
Just to confirm back, alternative one, the baseline, that's what we have right now, is that correct?
It is a service designed for that entire 41-mile corridor, but it's an express bus service. And there is a few dollars placed into some stations that could serve that regional express service. But yeah, I mean, honestly, Bill, I mean, it's very close to the 275LX, which Hart was operating, and of course, the express routes that PSTA is operating.
Okay, so we're looking at improvement in travel time from Pasco to downtown, going from 50 to 37 minutes. Is that right?
And that's a direct result of those dedicated lanes.
And St. Pete to Tampa, we get 5 minutes picked up.
Yep. And again, that's those dedicated lanes. And keep in mind that we could probably actually make those travel times a little bit faster. That's assuming that we're making every single stop along the way. And we do have plans to have some skip stop service in there, some express services as it were, inside the dedicated corridor.
Yeah, I'd like to see more bang for our buck here somehow.
Okay. Understood. Thank you, sir.
I would second that sentiment that Bill just shared, that, this is a regional transit project, and, getting to the major stations should be the focus, and then integrating with local transit, county specific from there should be the focus.
Understood. Thank you. So the recommendation is, like I mentioned before, alternative 3 as the locally preferred alternative. And again, we have more work to do. So this isn't the final design of the project by any means. Like I said, we would go into the environmental compliance portion of the project. So that's the alignment recommendation. The second piece of that, as I mentioned, is station locations and station designs. So we've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort developing a series of station design prototypes and evaluating their strengths and weaknesses across the neighborhoods they serve along the 41-mile corridor. Of course, we're always doing cost-benefit analysis, such as looking at the ridership, the travel times, and the cost to construct. And really, the 3 major categories of stations that we were dealing with are connecting to the FDOT proposed intermodal centers, which is a concurrent effort that the department is working on now. And of course, that's occurring at those major activity centers such as Gateway, West Shore, Tampa, USF, and Wesley Chapel. And in wherever that proposal is and where those intermodal centers get built, we certainly would want to connect to those to the best of our ability. So it really left the 2 remaining major prototypes, which was neighborhood or inline. So a neighborhood station prototype is something that's not in the interstate environment. It's actually at grade, at street level, either a block or a block and a half off of the interstate, which allows that good connectivity to the neighborhoods, bike, ped, and transit access. And then the last type is that inline station. So the example that I have a rendering that I'll show you this afternoon, but an example of that is where it's immediately adjacent to the interstate, and where actually the alignment is right side running or running on the outside. And so I have some images. It's probably better if I just describe those to you. This is a rendering of what a neighborhood station would look like. And it really has all the bells and whistles you'd expect from premium transit. Opportunity for micromobility connections, bike rentals, scooter rentals, off-board fare collection, wayfinding, passenger amenities. This concept actually has an enclosed station area to allow folks to get in and out of the elements, especially during the summer when we have a rainstorm. Whereas the inline is, as I mentioned before, it's adjacent to the interstate. You can see the top of the transit vehicle here. So this is the highway up at the higher level. This inlay is a good example. Looking down on the alignment, you can see the alignment here on the outside of the interstate. Operationally, of course, for the transit vehicle, that tends to be most efficient because you're just slowing down, allowing people to board and jump off the vehicle, and then it continues down its path. You don't lose time getting off the interstate. And we do have an opportunity to create a station that has internal circulation that gets people down to street level to make sure that you can get those neighborhood connections, walk bike connections, and we're even showing the possibility for some ground floor retail because of that station design. Although I will caveat that this station design, of course, as compared to the neighborhood station, is the most expensive because you can see it is more involved to construct. So the next couple of slides, I'm just going to start in Pasco and work our way down through the corridor and walk you through some of the recommendations for each station based on those prototypes and that cost benefit analysis. So you'll see the station type, whether it's an intermodal center, inline, or neighborhood. And then the location, which we're recommending the station to be at, as well as we're always very focused on equity. It's an important part of this project to make sure that we're providing service to transit dependent households and populations. So we have that number here, as well as the parking needs, which I think we have given the information related to the parking data requirements in a previous presentation. So at State Route 54, we're looking at a neighborhood station, which of course it's either, depending on your perspective, it's the end of the line or the beginning of the line. It allows us to get out of the interstate, turn the vehicle around, maybe even some opportunities from some back house operations that would be required for the service. And we're actually looking at something that's as adjacent to the Grove. So really great economic development opportunity there and a good connection point. Now moving further south to State Route 56, the Department of Transportation has a couple of different options they're looking at in terms of an intermodal center. As I mentioned before, of course, we'd always want to connect to that intermodal center if and when it gets built. But we're also very focused on connecting to the Tampa premium outlets. Again, another great economic engine in that area, good connection. And we have the opportunity to co-locate with Pasco County Transit's station that they already have on property. So that's something we've been looking at for State Route 56. Moving into Hillsborough County, we're looking at Bears Avenue. Again, the recommendation here is something that's at street level, not in the interstate alignment. We found that the closer we got to the corner of Nebraska and Bears, especially that southeast corner, had the best connectivity to the neighborhood. You know, best walk bike access, best transit access, and certainly serve the most transit dependent populations and households. Next is the USF area. So USF again is another intermodal center. Again, the Department of Transportation has a few recommendations for a location there. One of them is, again, on the east side. So looking at Fowler in Nebraska is a potential connection point there. Same comment as Bears. It gets us down to street level. It gets us in a position where we can connect well to the neighborhoods. Moving south from there is Waters and Bird Street. So in this instance, we're actually recommending an inline station. We found that the attractiveness in terms of ridership and its ability to serve the surrounding neighborhood was very similar between a neighborhood and an inline station. And the reason why we're suggesting the additional investment in the inline station here is more from an operational standpoint. So I know most of you are aware Bird Street is only a half a clover leaf in terms of an interchange, an existing interchange. So if we were to get out at that portion of the corridor to try to make connections at street level, it would actually require us to navigate all the way up to Bush Boulevard before we could get back into the alignment. So it really came down to a question of feasibility. And we looked at the feasibility to construct an inline station versus a neighborhood station, the time involved. But there's also a lot of activity that's potential right there adjacent to the interstate. You've got the big aging box or the old Kmart to the west, and of course the dog track to the east. And right there, you've got the river just south and the Sulphur Springs Community Center as well. So good connectivity there. Moving south from Watersburg, the next is the Heights area. Again, this is another neighborhood station. We had a great conversation with the station area working group, which is the MPO staff, city staff, and county staff. The idea here was to listen and honor the input that we got from the Heights neighborhood, in which they specifically asked us to keep a very small footprint and make it walkable and bikeable in the Heights area. So we took that to heart, and we're looking at co-locating with the Hart arterial BRT proposal, potentially along Florida Avenue. Keep it simple, keep a small footprint, and look to that partnership with that BRT and provide a connection point there. Now moving south into downtown Tampa, again, this is where we'd connect to one of those intermodal centers. If we had our druthers, we would want to be a little bit closer to the interstate. Really, I think there's some great opportunities, maximizing the Marion Street Transit Way. You've got Marion Street right there for a great connection to the Hart system. And if we have the opportunity to locate a station there, we could also use Marion Street to actually penetrate further into the downtown and get, really great connection and connectivity. Now we start moving to the west over towards Pinellas County. The next station was Himes. Again, here it's a neighborhood station. We found that the closer we got to Spruce and Dale Maybury, although we want to use Himes to avoid the congestion on Dale Maybury, we really got our best sort of connectivity to the Carver City neighborhoods, and again, serving the populations there. Next is West Shore. So West Shore is our second example of an inline station. Again, FDOT has the property at the Doubletree and the Charlie Steakhouse just north of the interstate. So we would want to have an inline station there to have a connection directly to that intermodal center. And keep in mind, the running way between West Shore and downtown Tampa would be in the median of the interstate at this portion of the corridor. So we could have the platform in that space. There's actually enough room in the median with a catwalk to get over to that intermodal center. Now working our way over to Pinellas across the bay, our first stop is the Greater Gateway area. We worked very closely with Ford Pinellas staff and the Greater Gateway Master Plan. And again, we want to connect to the intermodal center that's proposed there. And they're looking at a couple of different opportunities in and around the Carillon area. So we'd get out of the interstate and make a direct connection to that intermodal center. The next area south of that was 62nd Avenue area. And we did take a broader look at that entire neighborhood in Pinellas Park. And what we're actually finding is that if we use the existing interchange at 54th and got as close as we can to the 54th and Haynes intersection area, we found that that had the best ability to serve the neighborhoods, certainly the transit dependent populations. And then there's some good connectivity in terms of a future trail potentially on 28th Street that I know Ford Pinellas and the city of St. Petersburg has been considering. So some good options there. And then there from 62nd, we moved into downtown St. Pete. We have 2 stations in downtown St. Pete. Like I mentioned in the Heights, we really want to co-locate with the Sunrunner and use the First Avenue South and North pairs and the Sunrunner corridor to have a stop in and around Tropicana Field. And, of course, we'd want to work with the city of St. Petersburg in terms of their future plans for the Trop site. And then use the Sunrunner corridor to get into the core of downtown St. Pete. So really, in summary, we're looking at all neighborhood stations except for the 2 inline stations I mentioned, which is at West Shore and at Watersburg. So where we're at right now in terms of our cost estimate, our median cost estimate of our cost estimate range is 353 million. As you remember, when we first started the project coming out of the planning phase, the project costs were estimated at 455. So we're making good strides. We certainly got a lot more detail and a lot more design under our belt to really answer some of these questions and get, better handle on those costs. And you can see the breakdown of how that cost is allocated. So you see 27% is being spent on stations. Again, we've definitely been looking at the USF School of Architecture best practices on transit-oriented development, and making sure that you're making investments in stations that become an attraction in its own right and gives the development community some sense of permanency. Parking, we're only looking at 2% of the total project cost being spent on parking, and that's all surface parking. 39% would be infrastructure, and a heavy portion of that is that dedicated guideway between West Shore and downtown Tampa. 8% for transit vehicles, and then 24% for project reserves, which includes contingencies and professional services and insurancing and permitting and the like. So we've also, as you guys know, we've been closely coordinating with the department and the TB Next program since the beginning of the project. FDOT is proposing changes to the work program now that is moving projects back because of the downturn in state funding as a result of the pandemic, which that does affect our schedule. So we are closely monitoring that and replicating the TB Next schedule and trying to maintain consistency with that TB Next schedule, because ideally we'd like to be part of that one construction phase associated with that, the TB Next project. So as it were, we're looking at the first phase potentially being from Pasco to downtown Tampa, Tampa to West Shore, and then West Shore to Pinellas. And some of the reasoning there is, for example, segment 2, TB Next project in Pinellas is not funded in the work program. Segment 7, 7A is funded in the work program, which is just a small portion of the TB Next project north of downtown Tampa. The rest of it going out to Bears isn't funded yet, but it is at 100% design. And then, of course, we're very closely watching the funding for the State Route 60 interchange. That's a big part of our project. So we're trying to replicate the TB Next program as it stands today, but we're very much aware that this is a very dynamic conversation and is most likely to change in the coming year. And we're prepared to adapt as that TB Next program changes. We could easily do a phasing approach that does, St. Pete to West Shore and then Tampa to Pasco, leaving the West Shore to Tampa piece if funding isn't available for the State Route 60 interchange, for example. So we can change this phasing program. And really the goal here is just to be consistent with what FDOT's doing. But as it stands, unfortunately, that means with the current work program proposal, we're at best going to get started on service for the project in 10 years. So we've had good conversations with FTA. They're aware of that. They actually encouraged us to focus on being shovel worthy. That is definitely the term that is coming out of DC and from the Biden administration. And what we're trying to do is pre-position the project to take advantage of any funding opportunities that may come down the pipe. Whether it's a stimulus or recovery package for infrastructure, there's a lot of positive conversations coming from DC in terms of, renewing an emphasis on transit funding across the country. So we're definitely very closely watching that. So the nice thing is we get this chance to go ahead and jump in and complete NEPA and do as much as we can to get that project shovel worthy so that when a funding opportunity does arise, we can certainly take advantage of that. So those are the next steps. We'll be focusing on doing the environmental work, and then we're going to continue to finesse and refine what we call the proof of concept, which is the detailed operating plan for the service. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any other questions.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it very much. So let's take some questions from the committee. Bob Widmer.
Yeah, Scott, nice presentation.
Thank you.
Early on, you mentioned that the 190 million dedicated lanes in Howard Franklin was not cost effective, I believe.
That's correct.
And in your LPA Phase 3, you showed that next is kind of already earmarked 43 million for 7 miles of dedicated BRT lanes. I thought I read, though, in the St. Pete Times, when they showed the Tampa Bay Next plans, that they said that there were going to be 2 dedicated lanes on the Howard Franklin, which certainly is different from what you just described.
So we've had some really good conversations with Secretary Gwynn, and we've been coordinating with his design team since the beginning of the RRT. The replacement for the design build for the replacement of the Howard Franklin Bridge span is actually active. It's underway right now. And within that, they've got the 4 express lanes, 2 going in both directions, either direction, in which makes sense. I mean, FDOT's really looking to maximize that investment, and the preference is to not build in a dedicated lane across Howard Franklin Bridge and widen it further than what FDOT's got planned today, but use those express lanes. And informally, the secretary has mentioned that, he'd like to see us test the service using the express lanes, but there may be options if we're finding that transit service is still getting bogged down in traffic and different solutions needed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Other questions from the committee? I'm not sure I can see all the hands.
Bob Hanyon and then Bill Johnson, if you like.
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad that you had in there about the shovel-worthy or shovel-ready type of concept in case funds do become available. We've gotten quite a bit of notoriety in this region, Tampa Bay region, especially for sports and the Super Bowl and everything. And one thing that really are deficient on is transit. So if we can jump on this as soon as anything becomes available, it's a great time for us. We've already got the spotlight on us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole goal is to get the project as prepared as possible to take advantage of any funding opportunity that comes along. There has been some rumblings, nothing official, but the FDOT at Tallahassee level, the state secretary has made some comments and, expressed some interest in actually maybe potentially using some strategic intermodal center or system dollars that have been traditionally almost always funneled towards highway projects that could be used towards transit. So we're watching what happens from the Biden administration. We're going to watch what happens from Tallahassee and then go from there.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Other questions, Chris?
Would be Bill Johnson, would be next, and then Leo.
Bill, go ahead. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where are we on trying to figure out the local funding? If I do the math, 25% of the project would be something around $40 million. And where would that be funded from?
So that'll be my mission for this year, for 2021, Bill, for sure, is starting to have that conversation where we can potentially see what the local funding strategies could be. And some of it is we'd like to see where the Biden administration goes, because by policy, the FTA Capital Investment Grant Program can fund a project up to 80%. Now, historically, the trend in almost the unwritten rule is you're never going to get more than 50%. But there is some rumblings coming out of DC that they might honor that policy. So we'll have to wait and see, because if we can get 80% of the project funded by the Federal Transit Administration, then obviously that takes a lot of burden off the local investment. Although ultimately, the most important aspect of getting the project built is finding the local dollars to support the operations. And that all has to come from local.
Okay. The concern I have is from a local perspective, if that is all required to come from local effort, in addition to the operating, is there higher priority transit projects within the region, perhaps a local or a downtown core project that would serve more people and enhance economic development in our downtown areas. So I'm sort of wondering about priorities for taking available funding or new funding sources and put them on this project versus another alternative one. And I guess, are you going to get into that in this next coming year, or?
Yeah, we'd like to go out and start talking and giving presentations to each of the three MPOs, as well as the transit. What is it? Forget me. It eludes me. The regional group of MPO leaders, and they've established their regional priorities. I think it all, honestly, Bill, it all comes down to timing. You know, if nothing changes in the state work program and we're still looking at 10 years before we can get started, then yeah, you know, there might be some opportunities for investments that come before this project, certainly. And really, from a federal government standpoint, from the FTA standpoint, you know, they just want to see that they don't mind you sequencing projects and having an application back to back year after year. You know, especially if they know that they're all working together and they're all supporting the development of a network. So, you know, I guess it'll come down to timing, and we'll see where the state work program stands here in 2021, and then look to see how we can coordinate with each one of the MPO's individual priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Let me just ask a follow-up question along those lines, Scott. Do you envision a scenario whereby you might get near-term funding for one of the segments, one of the three segments that would launch that project off, or do you feel compelled to wait till you have a funding commitment for the entire project?
No, we could definitely do it in phases. I had the one slide there that kind of talked about the three phases. Yeah. But really, you know, the core markets are St. Pete to Tampa and then Pasco to Tampa. So if the TBNX program moves forward into construction on any one of those phases, we definitely want to be a part of that. And as it stands right now, the design for TBNX does include this project.
Good, thank you. Chris, we have other questions?
Leo would be next.
Leo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Not to belabor the point, Scott, I think, you know, you've done all your homework. This has been a very, you know, consistently very good presentation. I just can't stress enough how much I firmly believe that, you know, focusing on, you know, 4 or 5 major stations should be the goal here. You know, and the reason I'm just mentioning this again is because with all your talk of prioritization, I think, you know, emphasizing those key stations, you know, potentially, you know, as opposed to the neighborhood stops. You know, I would rather have 5, you know, really robust, well-developed, well-funded stations throughout the 3 counties than 10 or 12, you know, slightly less good stations. And, you know, it seems like that's copacetic with FDOT, TBNX program. And, you know, I'm sure you've also done this analysis, but looking at each county's local transit and seeing how they funnel into the stations. You know, I think most of the people in the greater Tampa area just want to see coordination among the different organizations. So, you know, presenting with PART, presenting with PSTA, or at least having their information woven into this presentation, I think would be really helpful.
Oh, no, it's a good point. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, agreed. We actually worked with each of the 3 transit agencies and came up with recommendations of how their local service could be, you know, modified. And I'm not talking major overhauls, but just make some modifications to get direct connection to these stations. So the transit agencies have been really helpful in that regard. So there is some underlining assumptions in terms of how we can make sure that that coordination is occurring. We did get a comment about the number of stations at the board meeting. And again, we have milestone 4 that we still have to complete, which is the environmental work. And we may actually find that during the environmental work that we may have to drop a station for a, you know, a community impact reason or the like. So, you know, again, it's this process of sort of whittling down until you get to the, you know, your sort of ultimate design. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we couldn't start having some conversations about some of these stations. Mr. Roberts and I, your chair, had some conversations via email in regards to that. During milestone 1, I have some of the information here. During milestone 1, we did take the 21 stations from the planning effort. We did a detailed forecasting estimate on it. And basically what we did is we took the top performing stations and we did a number of different model runs. We ran it with 7 stations, we ran it with 8 stations, 9 stations, and all the different combinations. And we were looking at what was the right number of stations to get us competitive for those federal grant dollars. And we found that, around 12 stations or more would put us in a position of being competitive. And what that is telling us is that we have that regional travel market there that's being served. And even though you lose a little bit of time slowing down, providing access to those neighborhoods seemed to be what was really, a driving force and making the project competitive. So really, we saw a threshold point at about 12 stations. You can see that actual increase in forecasted ridership in terms of percentage here. Again, one of the biggest jumps we saw was from 11 to 12 at about 8% and 13. And we saw another big jump when we actually added 15 stations, and it brought us all the way up to an 87% increase in ridership. But then, of course, we wanted to look at what is the cost per rider. So we're adding ridership, sure, but what is that cost benefit relationship? And that's something that we've always been looking at. And again, what we looked at, we found is that the cost per rider definitely began increasing, of course, as you added more stations. Although we did see, an interesting sort of sweet spot around 12 stations, where it was really cost effective and it really seemed to drive the ridership in the right direction. We took all this information to the stationary working group and the business working group and had good conversations with them. And actually had the city staff and the county staff work with us to start picking on the 21 stations to get it down to this number. And they asked us to stay at 13. So that's how we ended up with the 13. But like I mentioned before, we still got the environmental work to do. The design is not complete by any means. So it's we can still have that conversation.
Thank you. I mean, you've been thoughtful and robust in your explanations throughout. So thank you.
Rick Richmond would like recognition.
Rich, you're recognized.
Hey, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Scott. Good presentation as always. Just a quick question. I think we've kind of talked about this before, but with the number of offline stations, and I'm thinking of areas around the Nebraska and up in Fowler, USF Bears area. What is the treatment going to be? Are they going to be in free flowing off ramps with the general, I guess, traveler lanes there, or is this going to be dedicated and then maybe routed to the station or what have you? I understand that the location of the stations are probably still unknown, but the concern, obviously is offline is it adds trip, and then also during, peak hours, now you're sitting in those off ramps, which we've all experienced can be extremely congested. So just, could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So as I think I mentioned earlier, one of our next major steps during milestone 4 is to come up with that proof of concept. So this is where we get really drill down into those details. We did do a number of different forecasting model runs here with basically looking at those neighborhood stations with no improvements in terms of dedicated BRT lane at street level, TSP, queue jumps. So we want to get into those details and get to understand, is there even space to have a dedicated treatment for transit? Of course, how much does it cost? Yeah, because, whether it's Himes or Bears, I mean, you got some serious congestion there. And, for the portion in Pinellas and the portion north of downtown Tampa, where we're right side running, we might be able to actually continue to use the shoulder through the interchange, which would help jump that queue. And again, it's all about, it's almost like an elongated or sort of extended queue jump that we can use as far as like a highway treatment to get that transit vehicle out of that congestion and down to street level. So that's definitely something that we're going to be looking at next.
Karen Mullins would like recognition.
Hey,
Hi,
thank you.
Scott.
Okay.
Go ahead, Karen.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks for the presentation. It's great. Are there any plans, or is there a scenario where this will go forward if TBARTA is dissolved?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I have the answer for that, Karen. I mean, the project was funded entirely by FDOT. I'll leave that there. I do not have those answers yet.
The short answer is, Karen, we don't know.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Any other hands up, Chris?
I do not see any at this time.
Okay, I have a.
Oh, I think Josh is waving his hand.
I'm sorry.
Now.
Go ahead, Josh. You're recognized.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick, Scott, can you pull back up the numbers? You don't have to show the screen, but the ridership numbers and then also the final cost estimate for this scenario, just so I have them right in my notes.
Sure, it's 353 million. So that's our mean average.
Yep.
So we have a range that's about 301 to 400. Here, let me get the exact numbers for you. The range is 306 to 401, giving us a mean cost of 353. And for alternative 3, the daily ridership is 5,400.
5,400. Okay. And I'm curious, you made the mention to Sunrail, and I think that's a fair comparison. Although I wouldn't necessarily say that this route is comparable to commuter rail in general. I think Sunrail is maybe a poorly performing commuter rail route. Tri-Rail, for example, in South Florida triples basically what Sunrail does. So I would hesitate to make that broad comparison. Maybe a more regional. I don't know if it's apples to apples or not, but so I'm just trying to square the cost benefit, because this is a fairly, even if you were comparing it to commuter rail, a fairly poorly projected corridor for commuter rail. I mean, 5,000, 6,000 people a day is really not that great for this distance. Tampa streetcar is almost 2,000 people a day and it only goes 2 miles. Obviously there's demographic differences, and in the target audience is not regional, it's local people going to and from work. So there's a bit of a difference there, which I'm willing to cede. But from a cost benefit standpoint, at 5,400 people a day, what's 353 million divided by 5,400? That's 65,000 plus per person per day. That's a pretty high number for a pretty small ridership.
Well, we use the FTA cost effectiveness metric, being that's always been the goal, is getting that capital investment grant dollar potential.
Sure, but
their metric for performance is you annualize the ridership and you divide that by the annualized capital cost and the annualized operating costs. And alternative 3 with the current configuration puts us at about just under $10 a trip.
Right. And I get that component. I'm just trying again to weigh the cost benefit when you look at a per rider, per ticket. I'm not totally sold on the idea of transit-oriented development around some of these stations being as robust as we may see if it was truly fixed in a way that Sunrail is, for example. So again, I just think a lot of those are optimistic, and so I'll leave it at that.
No, I appreciate the comments. Thank you. And the only other, I won't belabor the point too much, other than add the fact that we model all the ridership with today's social economic data. we don't do any future forecasts. It's something that FTA asks us not to do. So, you know, what you're seeing numbers here is if the service were to open tomorrow, that's what we're forecasting. So hopefully, ideally, you know, as time goes on, you would actually see an improvement on those ridership numbers.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
Any other questions of Scott?
I see nothing.
If not, I have one more, Scott.
Sure.
You mentioned in response to Bill Johnson, you mentioned the local match and the mixture of the financing, and whether it's 10% or 25%, it's still a big number. Where are you in coming to grips with where those funds would come from? I mean, is that a regional funding source, or is that each county's MPO making a decision? What do you foresee?
So honestly, Mr. Chair, it needs to be all of those things. You know, we really need to be creative in terms of getting the funding, looking at private investments, looking at public partnerships, state dollars, local dollars. Really, we need to think about some of these technology grants that are out there. Does that make sense for this project? Really, you just need to weave together a number of different funding sources. And so that's why it's important for us to you know, get some resolution from the TBARTA board on the locally preferred alternative, because again, that creates this clean break for us to just focus only on this configuration for the project and start answering some of those questions.
Okay. Yeah, because I know at least one previous TBARTA board meeting, the idea of a regional sales tax has even come up as a way of supporting either the capital or the operational costs of a regional transit system. Any other questions of Scott before we let him off the hook?
I see none.
Seeing none. Scott, thanks a lot for coming. As you can tell, there's a lot of interest, and you've helped clear up a lot of good questions for us today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Scott, thank you. Next item on our agenda is the new business and committee discussion. I will just lead this off by reminding the committee that I gave a report, as you've asked me to do, to the TBARTA board at their last meeting. Our reports are always well received, and we did convey our suggestions to the TBARTA board. You recall our workshop generated a number of suggestions, and I conveyed those at the last meeting. I'd like to move on to one of the topics that's on our agenda is the gondola project, and I had thought of calling on member Bill Johnson to give us an update, and if he would care to, I would welcome that. But there may be some staff report that also could be in the form of an update on the gondola project. Bill, do you want to make a comment?
I really have no special insight into that
Okay.
gondola project at this time.
Okay. Chris, do you or Christy Anutis want to?
Brian Passaro could speak to that.
Brian, why don't you give us an update on the RFP?
Oh, helps if I pull my microphone down.
Thank you.
I wasn't on mute. It was a microphone. The short version is we just posted the request for qualifications to hire a consultant to do the Pinellas aerial gondola study. It's going to look at 2 corridors, one in one in Clearwater and one in St. Pete. The corridor in Clearwater that we're looking at would connect downtown Clearwater to Clearwater Beach with a possible stop at the Clearwater Marine Aquarium. The corridor in downtown St. Pete that we are going to be looking at would connect Tropicana Field to the new St. Pete Pier. Like I said, we just posted the RFQ, and I'm going to our procurement page now. The proposals are due sometime in, I believe, March.
March 8th, I think.
Yes. Okay. So basically, the procurement is underway.
And that was a request for proposal for consultants to analyze what the feasibility of a gondola service?
Right. So when we completed the innovative transit technology study, that was that study that looked at those three modes: Hyperloop, air taxis, and aerial gondolas. The study had recommendations for all three of those modes. For aerial gondolas, one of the recommendations was for TBARTA to see if there was municipal interest in taking a closer look at a particular corridor or corridors. So Whit Blanton from Forward Pinellas and I, we met with staff from the city of St. Pete and city of Clearwater, and there was indeed interest in taking it to the next step. And so that's kind of what led to us developing a scope of work for a study that would look at these two corridors in greater detail. I think the thought here is to do the analysis, pretty much do everything short of the environmental analysis, so that Mayor Kreisman and the city of Clearwater City Council can make a decision on, okay, do they actually want to take it further and look at a design build contract to actually do it.
Okay, good. Well, that'll be exciting as it moves forward. And when do you expect those, if the responses are due in mid-March, you would then shortly thereafter select a consultant, and what do you expect the time frame for the consultant's report?
Well, our time frame to get, because we would have to get approval from the board, I believe we would take it to the April board with the recommended consultant. In terms of how long it will take to complete the study, we're actually asking the proposers to give us a suggested timeline on how long it would take to complete. Because, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, there's no one at TBARTA, or probably not even at the two cities that are experts in aerial gondola projects. I mean, so we're going to put it on them. Tell us how long you think it's going to take to finish the study.
Okay, good. Thank you. Any questions about the gondola study project? I just wanted to bring
Rich Balcom would like the floor.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rich Balcom. Yeah, Brian, I missed the Clearwater location. What was the location of Clearwater?
It would connect downtown Clearwater to Clearwater Beach with a possible stop on where the Clearwater Marine Aquarium is.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, the next item under our new business and members' interest is I wanted to report that the TBARTA board did take action on the recommendation of this committee and prepared, and I'm sure has by now distributed proclamations of appreciation to the transit workers in all of our member counties. So I want to thank the staff for completing that project and let the committee know that our request was heeded and it was taken care of. The next item I wanted to mention was really covered in Scott Pringle's presentation, but I think it's important to note that the FDOT work program has had some significant slippage because of funding issues, and the most significant of which to us at TBARTA is the delay of the West Shore interchange by 2 years. That would push that project back to 2025. And so I want to make the committee aware of it. If you have an opportunity to speak to any of your elected representatives at the state legislature, please stress to them how important we think this one project is. It was funded for 1.2 billion set aside from the FDOT work program, and now we're seeing that slip. It has a potential for a significant impact on slowing any development of a regional transit system. The next item is identified as the CAC membership reaffirmation. I'm not going to speak to this one. I don't know if Chris.
Yeah, I'll try to help you out here if I can.
Please do. Go ahead.
Yes, this is basically just a reminder to the members of the committee that are fast approaching 2 years on the committee that you will need to be reaffirmed by whomever assigned you to the committee. So I just wanted to bring that up and give it some thought.
Okay.
Hopefully you all will want to stay on the committee.
We hope so. Along those lines, Chris, do you have any update for this committee about the potential for the gubernatorial appointments that are vacant on the TBARTA board?
I do not. I'm not sure if David might have an update on that.
Yes. Sorry. Good afternoon, everybody.
David?
Hey, Ron Pierce, our state lobbyist, had a meeting with the governor's office. I'm not sure if it was early last week or the week before to discuss this topic specifically because, as most of you are probably aware, we have a total of 4 gubernatorial appointee seats on TBARTA's board, 2 of which have been vacant for quite some time. And the 2 that were filled had actually, they had come to the end of their window. So they needed to be reappointed as well. It wasn't for lack of interest. From what Ron indicated, the governor's office had received applications from roughly 8 to 10 people throughout the region that were interested in serving on TBARTA's governing board. So at this point, the governor's office is vetting all of those folks. Since that meeting, Chairman Jim Holton has been reappointed by the governor already. So the loop on Jim is closed, and we're currently waiting on the other 3 folks. Cliff Manuel has been serving in one of those other 3 seats ever since he was appointed, and he certainly has interest in continuing to serve. So we would hope that he be reappointed as well, but we just haven't heard back yet. It sounds like the governor's office is in fact working on it, and we hope to hear something back within the coming weeks.
Good. Thank you for that report. We appreciate the update.
You're welcome.
If there are no questions on that issue, I wanted to put on the agenda the 2 legislative bill numbers that were reported at our last meeting by Ron Pierce. Senate Bill 422, which I believe is being sponsored by Senator Jim Boyd of Manatee County, and House Bill 2037, which my latest information is that Amber Marino has agreed to sponsor that bill. So if that's correct, I want to encourage our committee members to be aware of the fact that we have bills pending before the legislature. It's about to crank up. We would certainly appreciate you reaching out to your elected representatives, making them aware of these bills and communicating them your support in any form that you think is appropriate. And then we have another item. Item D is our TD Tampa Bay. Chris, you're going to give us that report.
Yes, I sure will.
Okay.
Yes, just a reminder that we are continue our partnership with TD Tampa Bay with USERV. I just want to give you some of the ridership statistics. In December, you may remember we had 70 trips for the month of December. and January. That went up to 260 trips. In the first week of February, there were 81 trips. And February is a short month, but we still expect that to probably outdo January. As expected, the majority of the trips are originating in Hillsborough County. And so about half of those, and the next highest is to be expected also is out of Pinellas. We are getting increased demand from Hernando. And the majority of the trips are medical and employment trips. About 100 of each of those were both medical and for employment. Trips crossing county lines, over 200. And we are also providing service when the CTCs are not operating, so evenings and weekends. And we provided about 112 evening trips and about 90 weekend trips. So that's the update for the TD Tampa Bay. If you got any questions, I'll be happy to respond.
Good. Thank you, Chris. Any questions of Chris on that status report? I don't see any hands up. Chris Chaddick, do you? Nope.
Nope, no hands.
All right. Is there any other business to come before the committee before we move to the last item? You know, typically toward the end of our meetings, if we've taken action, we make recommendations that would be reported to the TBARTA board. We've taken no action at today's meeting, but with the committee's permission, I'd like to report 3 comments. One is I'd like to report our support for the FDOT West Shore interchange timing of that funding. I'd like to thank the board for the proclamation for the transit operators. And then finally, I'd like to thank the board and encourage them to move ahead with the RFQ for the gondola study. Any other items or any opposition to reporting those 3 items?
Bob Henyon would like the floor.
Actually, it's on something that came up before. What process do we have to do to notify the board that we want reappointment to the CAC?
Well, I think that varies, but generally I think you should contact whomever appointed you rather than the TBARTA board. And who made your appointment, Bob? Just help me.
The chairman.
Okay. Chris Chaddick, can you help with that question? I mean, should he just simply give him a call or should he submit something more formal?
David has some information.
David, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just some suggestions for all of you who wish to continue serving on the committee. You know, we would request that you reach out to the particular board member who appointed you just to let them know that you are in fact interested in continuing. What I think would be easiest from staff standpoint is for us to compile a collective list of all of your names at once and to take that entire list to the board and have you all reaffirmed at the same time. I know we've got some vacancies that, you know, we would like to fill at the same time. So, you know, those board members with the vacancies for their respective positions, we would want to work with them on identifying some people to fill those seats. If any of you know of others who you think might be interested in serving on the committee as well, I think that would be helpful information for us to know. And, you know, we could certainly take some names to board members with vacancies.
Good.
Hello? Can you notify those of us who are approaching the 2-year time? Just give us a quick email that says, hey, you're approaching the end of your term.
We can. The last time we looked at the list, I think there were 3 of you who were good, and everybody else had already exceeded their term. So I think, again, if we could just do everybody again all in one shot. But yeah, we can definitely send that information.
I'm an alternate. Are you also requesting that alternates notify you?
Absolutely. If you're an alternate and you want to continue serving as an alternate, we would definitely want to know that as well.
All right.
Karen has her hand raised.
Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, the TBARTA board's been having some difficulty getting a quorum during this pandemic. Do we see something changing in that?
I think so. I'd say the reason we didn't have a quorum last month is because PSTA was making a change in their TBARTA representative. So that person wasn't identified in January, and they've since filled that position. So that person is expected to attend in February. We had a transition with a Hernando person, and we expect that individual to start showing up as well. One of the bills that we filed that you referenced Amber Mariano submitting on our behalf to the legislature will, if that gets passed, that will provide the two mayors the ability to appoint designees. The mayors have an ability to show up for meetings has been a challenge sometimes just due to their busy schedules. So that was a provision in the original TBARTA legislation back in 2007. And for some reason, when they changed it in 2017, that was removed. So if the mayors didn't attend, then, that counted against the quorum. But if we can get that reinstituted, that would help us as well as having the other two gubernatorial seats filled. Hopefully we won't have any more issues moving forward like we've had, but we're definitely working on it.
Well, and I think a partial answer to that question, David, if I may add, is in this hybrid meeting scenario that we're living with, my understanding is that in order to have a quorum, you have to have the quorum number has to be physically present in the room. Mm-hmm. And in the most recent meeting, with all due respects to my colleagues in Manatee County, the meeting was physically in Manatee County in Palmetto. I suspect that may have created a hardship or a timing problem for some of the TBARTA board members who live in Pasco or even further north. Just an observation.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So for this board, we don't need a certain number of people meeting in person. Is that true? I mean, I don't understand why it would be different for this board, for this organization rather than other committees that I'm on.
I think the answer is it's the same. My understanding is that in order for this committee to take action, we're still operating under rules where we have to have a physical quorum present in the room in order to take action. Others can participate virtually.
Nobody's in the room as far as I can tell, right? Everybody's Zooming in.
Yeah,
what I really think needs to happen is that law needs to change. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying we need to start it here, but I don't know how to affect a change like that where you can, where it's perfectly okay for a quorum to meet virtually rather than in a room. I mean, it makes it so that decisions can't ever be made. I mean, I don't remember if was there an option for this meeting to meet in person? I don't think so. So it's a given that we're not going to be able to make any decisions, right?
Yeah, we intentionally scheduled this meeting to be virtual only because we did not have any scheduled action items other than approval of the minutes.
Okay.
Our next meeting, we will face this problem.
Well, I really don't know. Does anybody have an idea for how to somehow change the law, or the governor or whatever is saying you need to meet in person, in order to vote on things?
Well, I will.
Yes, David.
I'm going to recognize David, but I want to say that the committee members will all recall that the governor suspended that requirement for.
I know, but then he put it back in.
All right, David, you're recognized.
Thank you. That was on our legislative agenda last year to address with the legislators when we went to Tallahassee and talked to them about the other things that we were asking for. And there are varying opinions in Tallahassee about that. The most heavy opinion being that as a regional board, if you are selected to serve on a board, then you have a obligation to actually show up and attend meetings in person.
That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. It's probably old white guys who are making that decision. Am I right? Yeah.
It remains on our agenda to talk to them about again, next
Please.
month. I think if there's one thing that everybody proved in 2020 is that, you can in fact conduct business virtually. So we're hoping
Easily. And the other thing, I'll be honest with you, the other thing that really irks me about groups like this and the Fort Pinellas CIC that I'm on is we're talking about public transit, and yet we have to drive to the meetings. It is virtually impossible for any one of us to get on a bus or anything to get to a meeting in person. Crazy. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Karen.
Karen Mullins also has her hand raised.
I think Bill Johnson experimented with getting to meetings in public transit. I'm sorry, Chris, who has a hand up?
Karen Mullins.
Karen, go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. I just wanted to make, from the echo that I spoke to Scott about, the bill that's being introduced by Senator Brandis, SD 1130. It does not need support in the House to move forward. I understand this could be this is what I'm doing for my constituents bill. But again, it does not need support in the House to move forward. So if you could contact your representatives, give a call out to Senator Brandis and say, hey, look, we're really looking forward to moving forward with TBARTA. Thanks.
Karen, would you mind giving the committee a short summary of the provisions of that bill?
Sure. Give me 1 second. Okay, so this is an act relating to the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority, repealing Part 4 of Chapter 343, state statute relating to the creation and operation of the authority, dissolving the authority and requiring the authority to discharge its liabilities, settle and close its activities and affairs, and provide for distribution of authority's assets. Amending the state statute 339 and 341, conforming provisions to changes made by the act, providing an effective date.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, but that's serious.
Thank you. And
Can you translate that into English?
And Rich Balcom would like the floor as well.
Yeah, I just want to get back to the subject that Karen was talking about, and David, you did say that they are going to address the subject again next month in terms of being present as opposed to using Zoom to be able to vote at meetings. Is that correct?
Yes, we're going to be talking to the delegation in Tampa Bay about including that on the list of items that we're hoping to have approved.
Well, my suggestion then would be, how does this committee feel about this issue? Are we in the majority that want to change the way that we do meet? Or is the majority in favor of physical attendance is what you want to do?
We can't decide. We can't vote because we're not in person.
I mean, generally speaking, if we
generally speaking, informally.
Informally, this group that's in attendance today, which is a small sampling, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct, Bill? We're not even on a quorum here, correct?
Right.
I mean, what as the chair, I mean, what is the feeling of this committee? Just talking about this committee, forget about the general board, but just the Citizens Advisory Committee. Do we want to have the option to be able to meet by Zoom and vote? I would be certainly in favor of it.
Yeah.
I don't know who would object to it since it is more efficient. But if there's other reasons not to do it, why don't we put in a request that we as a committee feel that
Mm,
this is the best way to move forward for
mhm.
our progress to get work done.
Yeah.
Let me get the sense of the committee by offering to report to the TBARTA board that the Citizens Advisory Committee would support the option of being able to meet virtually and
Mhm.
have those votes counted.
Right, and that way David can get with Mr. Pierce and push this forward.
Does anyone
Yeah.
on the committee object to me making that report to the TBARTA board? Is there any objection? Going once. Bob Whitmer.
Have a couple of hands. You have Bob Whitmer, Karen Mullins, and Bob Henyon.
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't have any problem with what you want to do. I will just state as a member of maybe the most northern county that I like the physical presence, and I try as often as I can, and I think I've demonstrated that, to be in attendance. So if you tell me the meeting is going to be virtual, I don't have a problem with that. If you tell me the meeting is going to be in person, I don't have a problem with that either, given that I will be social distancing and wear a mask.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. And I will echo your comments. You've been extraordinarily diligent in your attendance over the years. Karen Mullins, did you have your hands up?
I did. Thanks. I just wanted to say, and I'm sure Bob Hinyon's going to jump on this, our past meetings, a little over 2 years ago, we couldn't get a quorum together in the room. We were having telephone people active on the telephone with us, but they didn't qualify as a quorum. So this is not something that has come up since COVID. This is something that is we've been dealing with as a committee for some years.
And Bob Henyon would also like to be recognized.
Bob Henyon, go ahead.
As an old white guy, a quickly growing minority here, I agree with what Karen just said. We've had historically a problem, even when we were meeting at TBARTA headquarters, of having a physical quorum where more people were calling in on the phone. We weren't able to even elect officers, new officers, for a few years because of that. So this is really a chronic problem that we have to deal with. I fully support either having virtual meetings or meetings where a physically present quorum would allow votes from those online. But we have to change it because it's just too hard. People like Bob Whitmer come down every meeting, no matter where we meet. And it's not that you can't do it, you just got to be a little dedicated.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Good perspective. Other comments or suggestions? So let me ask you, Karen,
I can't seem to raise my hand anymore. I don't know what happened, but
I see you.
Bob, I didn't mean to include you in that bunch. I was talking about white guy legislators, not every white guy, because, you know, you're absolutely not included in that bunch. But yeah, when I was assigned to be the alternate here, you warned me, both you and Karen warned me, we'll never make any decisions because there's never a quorum. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and Bob Hinyon's right. I mean, there has been a long history of difficulty in getting a quorum together. What I've offered to the committee, since we can't take a vote, is I've offered to go to the board at their next meeting and strongly recommend that they support legislation allowing this committee and others to have virtual or hybrid meetings in which the electronic attendees count towards a quorum and can vote. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely.
Any objection?
Bill
Thank you
Johnson
so
would like
much,
recognition.
Bob.
Bill's
Chris,
got three.
Chris, who?
I agree with that. I do want to ask, is it possible that we could have alternate members
What do you mean?
appointed by the appointing authority? We have alternate members from the MPO
Oh,
that would
Hmm.
that would help reach a quorum.
hmm.
I don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly a good question, Bill.
Mhm.
Let me get with staff and we'll discuss the practicality of that. I think it's probably too late to introduce legislation for this session, although it's possible. And we might be able to tag this onto one of our existing bills. So I'll make the report on the recommendation to the TBARTA board on the committee's behalf and get back to you. David Green, you're recognized.
Thank you. I was just going to offer a comment on that because it seems like conversation a lot of times, reverts to the statute or the legislation, but
Right.
the legislation only covers the board. So I think, and I'm not talking about the quorum issue, but Mr. Johnson's comment about alternates, I think could be addressed in this committee's bylaws. And coincidentally, I was reviewing the bylaws earlier today and noticed that they were approved in 2008. And I would suggest dusting those off and maybe updating them and having them approved by this committee again, because the bylaws don't go to the board. The bylaws are approved by you all. So if you all want to give yourselves the ability to appoint alternates, I think you could possibly do that in your own bylaws.
That's a great suggestion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's bring this before our next meeting, and we'll either appoint a study committee or we'll actually make some recommendations. Fair enough.
Bob Henyon would like the floor.
Bob, be recognized.
Oh, you're muted, Bob. Bob, you're muted. Bob,
Bob.
you're muted. There you go.
I think we might be complicating the issue a lot here. Besides, we can't deal with the bylaws unless we have a quorum.
That's right.
We're just having a friendly discussion, Bob.
Remember, we used to use the phrase consensus when we didn't have a quorum.
Yep. Yeah. Trying to stay away from that at this point. But this has been a good discussion. Thank you all for getting engaged and making some really good suggestions. David, thank you for the idea of revisiting our bylaws. I think it's certainly time after 12 or 13 years. So. Any other business to come before the Citizens Committee? Well, thank you all for your time, your attention, and spending the time with us today. It's been an interesting and good meeting. We'll meet again in April, and the TBARTA board meeting is next Friday. I'm sure you're welcome to join in and watch that and see what happens. So if there's nothing further, this meeting is adjourned.
Is the
Thank
next
you.
meeting,
Take
is the
care.
next
Stay
meeting
well, stay
virtual
safe.
or in person?
To be determined.